Okay, let's be honest with ourselves for a second. When we usually talk about chemistry or, history and a deep dive, we're picturing bubbling beakers, dusty
Mhm.
textbooks,
Yeah,
maybe a suspension bridge or two.
right.
But today, we are talking about history and chemistry wrapped in butter. Lots and lots of butter.
It is a significant amount of butter,
Sure.
but it's also a masterclass in structural engineering. We're doing a deep dive into one of the most deceptively simple desserts out there, the pound cake.
And we aren't just pulling a random recipe off a food blog here.
Hmm.
We're looking at a specific instructional session from the absolute queen of domestic arts, Martha Stewart.
Hmm.
She breaks down the evolution of the pound cake into three very distinct stages.
Yeah.
The traditional American, the cream cheese, and this really complex semolina hybrid.
And what's so fascinating about this source material is that it moves way beyond just the how-to. I mean, anybody can follow a recipe card.
So-
Martha really gets into the why the temperature of your eggs matters, why you sift flour 3 times versus, just whisking it, and how changing one single ingredient changes the entire physics of the crumb.
Exactly. Our mission today is to decode the technique. Because honestly, before this, I thought a pound cake was just a heavy cake. I didn't realize there was this much nuance.
It's heavy, but it has to be heavy in the right way. If you mess up the physics, it's not a cake, it's a building material.
So let's start with the blueprint, the namesake, the traditional American pound cake. And I love this because the name literally tells you the recipe. It might be the easiest grocery list in history.
It is. The origins are purely mathematical, dating back to a time when, literacy wasn't widespread.
But everyone knew how to use a scale.
Exactly. A pound of flour, a pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, and a pound of butter.
That is a lot of butter.
It is. But that specific 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 ratio is what creates that dense, tender texture we associate with the pound cake. You aren't looking for, the airy fluffiness of a sponge cake here. You want a tight crumb.
Okay.
Now, Martha's using this traditional ratio, but she adds a specific variation in our source material. She's making a Meyer lemon version.
Right, and she's oddly specific about the fruit. She specifies Meyer lemons, not just lemons.
There is a botanical reason for that. Meyer lemons are a hybrid, likely between a lemon and a mandarin orange. They have a smoother, darker yellow rind, they're more fragrant, and they're sweeter.
She gives a warning here that I feel like I've heard before, but she is adamant about it. When you are grating that zest, do not grate down to the white pith.
The pith is where all the bitterness lives. In a cake that relies so heavily on butter and sugar, that bitter note from the white pith will just cut through and ruin the flavor profile. You only want the yellow gold, the essential oils in the skin.
Okay, so we have our ingredients. But the first massive aha moment for me in this deep dive wasn't about the food at all. It was the hardware, specifically the pan prep.
This is where a lot of home bakers fail before they even crack a single egg.
I have to admit, I'm so guilty of this. I usually just take the butter wrapper and smear it around the inside of the loaf pan.
Yep.
Martha basically says that is amateur hour.
It's not enough for this type of cake. Martha's using a traditional bakery pound cake pan, which is that deep rectangular loaf style. It has sharp corners.
Oh.
If you use a wrapper, you are just kind of bridging over those corners, not getting into them.
So what's the protocol? What does she do?
She uses a soft bristled brush dipped in softened butter.
A brush. That feels so artistic.
It's practical geometry. The bristles of the brush can push that fat into every single microscopic crack and corner of the metal. If you miss a spot, the cake sticks.
Right.
And if you use too much butter, the crust effectively fries and gets greasy. The brush gives you that perfect, even, thin coating.
And then comes the flour. She flours the pan, which is standard, but then she flips it over and shakes it out aggressively. She says you do not want puddles of flour in the corners.
That is such a great visual. If you leave a puddle of flour in the corner of the pan, it doesn't incorporate into the batter. It just bakes into this white, gummy, tasteless patch on the crust.
Yeah.
It looks unprofessional and tastes like raw flour. You want a layer that is basically just dust.
Okay, the pan is prepped. Now we get to the batter. And this is where we run into what I'm calling the great sifting debate.
Mhm.
Because Martha is strict here.
It's not a debate in her kitchen, it's a mandate.
She is using cake flour, but she doesn't just scoop it. She sifts the flour before she measures it. Then she measures it. Then she adds the dry ingredients, baking powder and coarse salt, and sifts it again. That seems like a lot of work.
It seems redundant, but it isn't. You have to understand that flour is compressible. When it sits in a bag on a truck or in your pantry, it settles and packs down.
So a cup of packed flour is heavier than a cup of loose flour.
Significantly. If you just dip your measuring cup into packed flour, you could be accidentally adding 20% more flour than the recipe calls for. In baking, That is catastrophic.
It turns your pound cake into a doorstop.
Exactly.
So the first sift is to standardize the density.
You got it. You fluff it up, then you measure it. That ensures you have the exact amount of flour the chemistry requires.
And the second sift, with the salt and baking powder.
That is for distribution and aeration. You don't want to bite into a pocket of salty baking powder. Sifting ensures it is chemically dispersed throughout the whole mix, and it adds air. This cake relies heavily on mechanical leavening during the creaming phase.
Let's talk about that creaming phase. We've got 3 sticks of butter, and she emphasizes they must be at room temperature. Same with the 8 eggs.
Temperature is everything here. You're trying to create an emulsion mixing fat and water. If your butter is cold, it won't mix with the sugar properly. It'll stay in chunks.
Okay.
And if your eggs are cold, when you add them to the butter, they'll shock the fat and curdle the batter.
That's when it looks like cottage cheese, right?
Exactly. And if your batter curdles, it loses its ability to hold those precious air bubbles. The cake won't rise.
She mixes the butter and sugar until, and I love this description, the sugar granules are no longer crunchy.
That's the sensory cue. You can hear it and you can feel it. Mechanically, what you're doing is using the sharp crystals of the sugar to punch millions of tiny air holes into the butter. That's where the lift comes from.
So if it's still crunchy, you haven't punched enough holes yet.
Not yet. Keep going.
So she adds the eggs one at a time, adds the flour, and bam, into the oven at 325 degrees for an hour and a half. That is a long bake.
It's a dense batter in a deep pan. It takes time for the heat to penetrate all the way to the geometric center. And because of that long bake time and the structure, you get a very specific visual characteristic.
The crack.
Yes. The cake cracks right down the center. Martha says we actually want this. Unlike a cheesecake where a crack is a tragedy, here it's aesthetic. It shows the cake has risen properly. The outside crust sets first, forming a shell. The batter inside is still heating up and expanding. Eventually, it has nowhere to go but up, so it bursts through the top crust. It's rustic. It says, I am a homemade pound cake.
So that's the baseline, the classic. But then Martha introduces the rich cousin, the cream cheese pound cake.
This is a really interesting evolution. By introducing cream cheese, you are fundamentally altering the fat profile and the acidity of the batter.
She mentions this is her daughter Alexis's favorite recipe. It's the one the family requests.
And it's easy to see why. The cream cheese creates a darker, thicker crust and a much tighter, denser crumb. It's less fluffy than the traditional version, but more velvety.
The ingredients shift a bit here. We drop from a pound of butter to just 1.5 cups, so 3 sticks, plus an 8-ounce package of Philadelphia cream cheese.
Right.
And we only use 6 eggs instead of 8.
Right, because the cream cheese provides some of that structure and binding that the eggs would normally provide, but with more fat and less water content than egg whites.
But here is what shocked me. After the strict sift, measure, sift lecture for the first cake, for the cream cheese cake, Martha gets, I don't want to say lazy, but
Lenient.
lenient, that's the word.
It does seem contradictory on the surface, doesn't it?
She explicitly says that whisking the dry ingredients, flour and salt, is almost as good as sifting. She doesn't even touch the sifter.
That signals that this batter is more forgiving because it's a wetter and heavier batter. Her words, the delicate aeration from sifting isn't quite as critical as it is for the lighter traditional cake.
Ah, okay.
The cream cheese weighs it down regardless. You aren't fighting for maximum lift here. You're leaning into the density.
She even notes that when you lift the bowl, it's heavy. She guesses it's a 4-pound cake.
It's a substantial dessert, and because it's wetter and heavier, the baking thermodynamics change. She splits this batter into 2 loaf pans, and they only go in for 45 to 50 minutes at 325.
So lighter on the labor, heavier on the stomach. I can respect that.
It connects back to the chemistry. The acidity in the cream cheese also tenderizes the gluten strands. Acid breaks down protein. That's why, even though it's dense, it has that melt-in-your-mouth quality.
Okay, so we've mastered the classic and the cream cheese. Now we arrive at the final boss level, the semolina cake.
This is where things get technically complex. Martha describes this as a cross between a pound cake and a sponge cake.
It sounds fancy.
Yeah.
Semolina. I usually think of pasta when I hear that word.
Exactly. Semolina is a coarser grind of durum wheat. It's usually used for spaghetti. By adding it to a cake, along with ground almonds, you are introducing a granular texture, a crunch, that you don't get in a standard flour cake.
And she uses castor sugar for this one, which is super fine. But the secret ingredient, the one that made me laugh out loud, was the condensed milk.
Ah, yes. The sinful snack.
Martha Stewart, admitting that she stands by the fridge and eats condensed milk straight from the can instead of a carrot stick. I have never felt more seen.
It's a very human moment. But functionally, those 4 tablespoons of condensed milk beaten into the butter mixture add a unique, concentrated milky sweetness. More importantly, condensed milk is sticky. It helps bind the crumb in a batter that has grainy semolina and nut meal, which don't have the same binding power as wheat flour.
But here's why I call this the boss level. The technique is totally different. It's the sponge technique. You have to separate the eggs.
This is the critical divergence. In the previous cakes, we relied on chemical leavening and creaming butter. Here, we're relying on the mechanical power of egg whites.
So she takes 8 egg whites and beats them with sugar until they have glistening peaks. Then she adds 12 egg yolks. Wait, 12 yolks.
12 yolks. It is incredibly rich. She adds the yolks one at a time to the whites. This creates a massive volume of fluffy, aerated egg foam.
And this leads to the most stressful part of baking for me, the fold.
The fold is where you can ruin everything in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You have this beautiful, airy egg mixture, and you have to combine it with the heavy butter, condensed milk, orange zest, nuts, and semolina.
She's very specific about the motion. Center, around, down to the bottom.
If you stir it like a soup, you pop all the bubbles you just created. The air escapes, and the cake will be a flat, rubbery puck. You have to gently wrap the batter around the dry ingredients. You're trying to hide the flour inside the foam without crushing the foam.
She's using a tube pan for this one, like an angel food pan. And interestingly, she says to butter it, but not flour it.
Likely because the semolina and almond meal provide enough texture that they won't stick as aggressively as pure wheat flour. Also, having the batter touch the buttered metal directly helps the crust fry slightly, which enhances that crunchy texture we want.
And the temperature changes. We're up to 350 degrees now.
A higher heat helps the air bubbles in the egg foam expand quickly, what we call oven spring, before the structure sets. It bakes for about 30 to 35 minutes, but then, and this is unusual, she covers it with foil and bakes it for another 10 to 20 minutes.
That foil shield prevents the top from burning while the dense center finishes cooking. It's high maintenance, this cake.
It is, but the payoff is a texture that is simultaneously crunchy from the semolina, rich from the almonds and condensed milk, and airy from the sponge method. It's a hybrid marvel.
Okay, we can't serve these naked. Martha gives us 2 presentation options that look incredible. First, for the lemon cakes, there's a glaze.
Simple chemistry again. Confectioner's sugar and Meyer lemon juice.
But the trick is the timing. She pours it over the cake while it is still warm.
Crucial point. If the cake is cold, the glaze sits on top like a hat. If the cake is warm, the heat lowers the viscosity of the glaze. It melts slightly and drips down the sides, and crucially, some of it absorbs into the crust.
So every bite has that sour lemon kick right in the crust. But the garnish for the semolina cake, that blew my mind. Candied orange slices.
This was a lesson in knife skills.
She pulls out a Japanese cleaver.
You need a thin, razor-sharp blade. The goal is to get slices of orange that are paper thin. If they're thick, the rind stays chewy. If they're thin, it becomes candy.
And then she basically buries them in powdered sugar. She puts them in a strainer and coats them heavily. Half a cup of sugar. It looked like a snowstorm.
It looks like way too much, but it's necessary. She puts them on parchment paper at the bottom of the oven while the cakes are baking.
And the result. She says the sugar melts completely into a clear candy shell. You don't see the white powder anymore. It's just this glossy glass-like orange slice.
It's a clever use of the oven's ambient heat. You're essentially dehydrating the fruit and melting the sugar into a caramel glass simultaneously.
And she suggests serving that with whipped cream, creme fraiche, or get this buttermilk ice cream.
The acidity of buttermilk would cut through the richness of that semolina cake perfectly. It's a balance of fat and acid again.
So let's unpack this. We started with a basic ratio pound for pound. We ended up separating eggs, folding foams, and candying fruit.
We saw 3 distinct textures. The traditional American, fine crumb, tender, reliable. The cream cheese, dense, tangy with a heavy crust. And the semolina, crunchy, airy, complex.
And for me, the big takeaway isn't even the recipes themselves, but the adaptability. Like knowing when to sift like a maniac because you need air and when to just whisk it because the batter is heavy anyway.
That's the difference between following a recipe and understanding baking. When you understand the function of the ingredients, that cream cheese adds water and fat, that egg whites add mechanical air, you can start to make choices rather than just following instructions.
You stop being a robot and start being a chemist.
You do.
It makes you wonder, though. We have these perfect ratios now. We know exactly 325 degrees versus 350. But how many failed cakes did it take to get here?
That is the question. Who is the first person to look at a perfectly good cake batter and think, you know what this needs? A block of cheese. Or what if I grind this pasta weight and put it in?
Or I'm going to eat this condensed milk, but maybe I'll save 4 tablespoons for the butter.
Precisely. Every perfect recipe is just the survivor of 1,000 kitchen disasters.
So next time you're in the kitchen, don't be afraid to experiment with your variables. Turn the heat up, swap the flour, see what happens. You might just invent the next classic.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the world of pound cake.
Happy baking.